Hello, Stephen. Caught in the act?
Michelle. Yes.
Hydrating?
Mid-sip.
Mid-sip.
Good
How are
to
you
see
doing
you.
today? Good to see you.
Welcome back. Co-welcome back to Feuertips. Glad to have you all with us today. We're going to have a lot of fun today, but before that, I'm going to do my intro. And part of my intro is, wow, the world really sucks these days. I guess it sucks for somebody and a lot of people every day, but obviously still in the midst of this terrible crisis with Vladimir Putin. I'd like to say he's a madman. Unfortunately, I don't think he's mad enough, but he might be mad enough to start a world war. So we're going to not offer you three different groups to help heal the planet. This week, we are going to donate. We're going to use our funds for our Feuertip program to fund Ukraine relief. So we won't be getting further into that on this call. And I don't know about all of you, but I'm having trouble focusing. It is tough. So hopefully this crisis resolves itself as quickly as possible without a whole lot more death. In the meantime, one of the things we can do with software is retreat from the scary world and just have fun with code. So let's talk about code. So last week, I talked about dynamic SQL and offered some tips. And there was this really smart character who attended the session. He started, wah. That's no good. SQL injection. Why don't you use Dbms Assert? It's like, woo. Dbms Assert, another built-in package. So I thought, all right, no good deed goes unpunished. So for this week, I'm inviting that smart character onto the show. And we're going to go exploring some of the cracks that you can fall through when you're writing dynamic SQL and how Dbms Assert can help you fix them. So I'd like to bring on Anton Nielsen of Insum. Anton, come on.
Always such a troublemaker, Anton.
Hey, thanks so much for having me. I appreciate it. And as you mentioned, I actually did the same thing to somebody else the other day. He asked a question and I brought him on the show. I love this. That's what you get for being a smart aleck.
Yeah. Hey guys, before we go on, can I just say something very cool? Hello to our colleague Graham, who's joining from Singapore. How crazy is that? What time is it in Singapore right now, Graham? We also have Bogdan joining from Romania, and we've got Rachel from the US. So I love this. So global, international, and thank you all for joining.
Sure.
Awesome.
And Anton, I meant to mention this to you before we were prepping for the call, and we just started going right off into 6 variations of code and all this and all that. But one of the things I do with my show is every week I offer a favorite cultural artifact. It started off as a favorite book, but it became movies, whatever.
Yeah.
So if you don't mind, if you've got a favorite book or cultural artifact that you'd like to share with us at the end of this time, then we'll do that. You can think about it as I'm blah, 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 and whatever. If not, I've got a backup. Even though
I have one already in mind. So
okay, good. All right. So let's start talking about Dbms Assert. And so I've got some really exciting news for you, Anton. I was working on some code, and I've been writing SQL and PL SQL since 1991 or something.
A little while, yeah.
Pretty crazy, right? And I've been writing so many update statements, deletes, and I finally decided, why do I keep writing update statements over and over again? They all have the same form, right? Update table, set column list, where. And I thought, you know what? I bet I could write one procedure that could update the numeric value, a numeric column's value for any schema, any table, any column. So you just write one procedure, and then nobody else ever has to write an update statement again. Let me show you this. It's just
I can see Anton loving your idea already.
If anyone can do it, you can do it.
So share my screen with you, Michelle.
I'll share your screen. And by the way, we don't have Mark this week. Mark is away on vacation, so I'm going to leave you guys to it and run the show from behind the scenes. Have a great show.
Thank you, Michelle.
Thanks.
So Anton, here it is in all of its glory. And look, exception handling too. So update numeric value, pass in the owner, the table, the name of the column, the where clause. We should probably make this a default of no, so you can update all rows, no problem. And then the numeric value that you want to pass in. I construct the update statement.
Yeah. Well, and
I
see that you're using a bind variable, so it must be SQL injection proof. I mean, because you're using a bind variable.
Right.
Yeah,
I'm not concatenating in the value. I'm just concatenating in the owner and the table and the name of the column. And I can't bind those things anyway, can I? No.
No.
Yeah, you can't bind a column name,
so,
right?
Perfect.
And then if anything goes wrong, I report the errors, no problem. So what do you think? No more updates. People don't have to write updates. We should publish this as an Insum utility. Everybody's going to be so proud of us and excited.
Yeah. Oh, everybody's going to love this. Everybody in the hacking schools of, well, I don't want to name specific countries, but one of them is on our
currently under attack
already. So yeah, I think. So I'm going to rewind for a second and say it was you that actually convinced me that execute immediate isn't just inherently bad. Right. So I've come around. I actually use execute immediate a fair amount now, a lot more than I did before listening to you. But I have to say, anytime you concatenate something in, oh boy, do you have to be careful. Right?
Okay, but wait a minute. That wasn't supposed to be your objection to this procedure. Your objection to this procedure should have been, are you crazy, Stephen? You're going to replace everybody's update statements with this theoretically variable API that anybody can use. So I just want to, and of course, it's only numeric columns. So I really need a package with a separate procedure for every data type. It'd be really cool. Overloading takes care of it. Can be the same name. So folks, I just want to point out, since Anton didn't slap me around enough, that if you ever start thinking about building this generic SQL API so that you never have to write a SQL statement again, you can just pass in parts of it in the PL SQL API. If you want to do it as a fun exercise, by all means. If you ever want to use it in a production application, you should be fired. So you decide which one. Okay, so it's a silly piece of code, but
exactly.
Let's go.
It is silly, but you'll find that there are places where you're doing this kind of thing legitimately, right?
Right. So Michelle, if you could share my screen again. So let's take a look at using it. And does it even work? Right? It's the sort of thing you really shouldn't do, but maybe it works. So here we go. Update the employees table owned by the current user. Update the salary column for this department, and set it to this value. And guys, I mean, this is so cool. Looks like I'm reconnecting, as happens so often in SQL Developer. So what you'll find, because we have to talk through this moment now, what you'll find is, maybe it can work. No, reconnect. Come on.
So I'm gonna say I just pretended. It's pretty easy. It worked. It worked.
There we go. Yep. So we run this piece of code. First of all, we create the procedure, run the piece of code, and a row was updated. Yeah. All right. So under some circumstances, right, it's okay. And then what?
Right. Well, yeah, here we go. We get all the other things that you can pass in there. It's just, you can pass in all kinds of stuff and it's going to just run it. Right.
And I think the core thing to remind folks, if you haven't run into this sort of thing before, if you haven't heard about Little Bobby tables, go check out the XKCD comic. You can look at this string and you can say, I've carefully constructed this. Look, nothing goes in between the update keyword and the dot besides the owner name. After that's the table. I've got it all laid out in the separate parts. How could anything go wrong? The most fundamental thing to realize in terms of going wrong is you can just stick a semicolon inside the string and say, terminate that statement. Let's start another one. It's no problem, Anton. This is not a big deal. Obviously, characters like semicolons and you name it, all sorts of crazy characters shouldn't be showing up in the names of objects, right? This is the name of the table that I'm passing through. So why don't we just do this? Let's just blacklist. So here's my bad character list. And these are all the things that should never show up in an identifier. And then I simply have this little function. Does it have a bad character or not? I go through all the list of the bad characters. If I find a match, I go through each of the characters in the string in the name. I look for a match. If there's no match,
and you could even take that whole loop out and use a regex expression. Yeah.
No. No. I will never use a regex expression.
All right, I hear that too. But regardless of how you want to go through it, right? I mean, it's gonna you're doing a blacklist, and I
well, come on, let's try it out. Come on, so
let's try it.
Updated the rows. And I tried to do this one, right? I'm going to try to sneak in some really bad stuff. Yeah. Boom. We're good.
We are good. We are good. But Stephen, I'm a little bit worried because I have tables that have wacky names, that have spaces in them. It's pretty easy. You just put double quotes around it. You can have Oracle lets you have almost anything as a table name. In fact,
I like this.
Yeah, sure. Yep. I actually have a table name.
All right,
I
so
have a
just as a
table.
reminder, right, there are some very sensible rules for identifiers in Oracle. No longer limited to 30, but anyway, numbers has to start with a letter, can have an underscore, can have a pound sign, $sign, but not a lot of other stuff, unless you put them inside double quotes, right? So if we go back to my blacklisting, my attempt to manually say, we got it taken care of, no worries. Then if I try to run it for this code, which is completely valid, it's a valid table name.
Should be.
Boom. My employees cannot contain any of these characters.
Yeah.
So it rejected it, even though it was valid. Also, by the way, if you ever put together a list of bad characters, well, be careful. I just went along the keyboard, like tapping anything that didn't look like a letter or a number. So I got an underscore in there, which is completely valid. I've got $sign and hash.
Right. Exactly. And Niels is pointing that out exactly. In fact, I think all of those are valid, except I see one character in line 8 that's not valid in a table name.
Yeah?
Yeah. It's the double quote.
Oh, right, because of course.
And that's true in Oracle. But MySQL, SQL Server, Postgres, I think as well, all allow double quotes even in their table names.
Well, couldn't you have double quotes doubled?
Not in Oracle. But
Oracle.
anyway.
Oh, we're so disappointed. Okay, so this is crazy. The bottom line is, as soon as you concatenate, you're introducing the possibility of injection. Then you need to look carefully at the specific circumstances. And in general, trying to come up with a sort of manual hand-coded protection is going to be very hard. Whitelisting might work. Blacklisting never works. If you can say, look, I only accept the following 5 values, well, then it's okay. But in terms of a generic interface, this is bad news. So Anton, fine. Last week you mentioned this package.
You said something that I wanted to say is, I think, valid across the spectrum of coding. And that's that blacklisting just doesn't work. It's just somebody's going to find a way around your blacklist. So if you're willing to whitelist things, okay, but now things become super restrictive.
And I will just say, because it's something I'm working on, there's been a lot of work being done inside the programming environment to kind of like neutralize the language that we use. For example, master slave. I hate talking about master slave processes. It just grates on me. Same thing with whitelisting and blacklisting. There are inherent values behind it. So we usually talk more in terms of control and blocking control and giving access rather than white versus black. Okay, all right. So last week you mentioned this thing, Dbms Assert. That's my dog messing with my keyboard.
Yeah, that's
come on, Falcor. So let's talk about Dbms Assert. Should we just look at an example of using it first? Did you want to talk about it a bit?
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, let's jump right into an example. I mean, this is about being able to check your code. And, I'm going to start right away with just a really quick observation, in that you've prefaced your Dbms Assert with sys dot. And I think that's great.
Do you do it?
I do. I use.
We're all built-in packages?
For pretty much, yeah.
I admire you greatly. So the idea here is that, and this was first brought to my mind by Bryn Llewellyn, former PL/SQL product manager, that if you don't qualify built-in package names like Dbms Assert, Dbms output with sys dot, then if somebody is able to get into your system and compiles a new package with the same name and matching API as Dbms output or Dbms Assert, if you don't qualify with the owner name, then you'll suddenly be running the hacked Dbms Assert or the hacked Dbms output. So the best practice, without a doubt, and one of those that I do not generally follow, is always put the schema name sys dot in front of all your built-in packages. Okay.
Yeah. And I'm going to say that really drives the point home that you aren't just protecting against your own code and your own data. You're protecting against the stuff that somebody else put in there, right? You're pulling from a table and you say, oh, I know that this data in this table, whenever I put data in this table, it's always good. So I can trust it.
Right.
You're not the only one that can put data into a table, probably, right? So yeah, I think it's really important in all these cases to realize that you're not just protecting against you, you're protecting against anybody else that might have done something that they shouldn't have. So
all right, so sys dot. There we go. And so let's go ahead and apply it properly there as well.
Great. Yeah. All right. There we go.
Okay.
All those spots. So, so I think that this is a big step in the right direction.
Why? What do these things do?
Well, they check to see that these are really there. So you've really got a schema name that's named the schema that you're passing in. You've really got an object name of the table that you're passing in, right? So there you go. That's a great first step.
And let's just go. This is the documentation for Dbms assert. It's got a weird, very general description. It sounds like it's a general assertion package, but it basically asserts, for the most part, that your object, that the strings you pass in are verifiable as existing within the database. Is it a valid schema name? And if so, it just returns the string you pass in unchanged. If it's not a valid schema name, it raises an exception. Same thing with the simple and qualified SQL names.
Right.
So,
and I'll say sometimes it returns the same name, but sometimes it returns a different name, a different string. And we'll talk about that in just a second. But yeah, sometimes it does return a different string. And so schema name, SQL object name, like you said, they're going to return what you passed in. The challenge here is that your SQL object name is if you just pass in a string, it's going to uppercase it and assume that you're looking for it without quotes around it. So those things that you just had are going to fail. My exclamation point.
Here, let's try it out.
Yeah.
So I'm going to compile this program, and now we'll go down and do this one.
Yeah, that should work.
Rows updated 1. Okay.
Yeah.
Now we've got this crazy piece of code here. Let's see if it rejects it, because this is supposed to be, we're trying to say, hey, this is a table name.
Right.
And now it says invalid object name. So we got a specific error failure, not just a generic, just a minus 20,000, something went wrong. So that's great.
Right.
Okay. And then we're going to try with this. So there's my quote unquote bad name.
Right. And that actually worked. And the reason that worked is you passed in double quotes around the name. You double quoted it.
So the point is, and that's what I had before, right? We'll
right.
just to say so this didn't work before.
Right.
And now it's working because we're not looking at the text and the string character by character. We're saying, is this a valid table name?
Right.
And it is a valid table name, and it's inside the double quotes to enforce the uppercase when it does the check, right?
Right. To enforce, well, the asterisk, the bang, the exclamation point. Right. Yes. So that gets us a long way in. But the challenge here is that somebody could still potentially pass in things that you don't want to just allow. And so something like this that you're just passing in is going to.
Right. So we've got another table here, which is my single quote employees.
Right.
So I've got two of these crazy name tables. Let's verify that. So my exclamation mark, my single quote. And if I try to use this now, I've got SQL object, schema name, SQL object name. When I try to do it for this one, it said it worked. Huh? Maybe it wasn't working last. No,
it worked this time because you've got the double quote there that translates to a single quote. So these things are all going to work. Are going to work this way, right? Now that's going to fail because you don't have this with double quotes.
Right, but that's what I wanted to point out. So we're passing in the name of this table now. We're passing in this table name.
And you're not only passing in the table name, you're passing it in with double quotes around it. Right? And so because you're doing that, you're actually, when you do your SQL object name, you're checking it with the double quotes around it. And so that's going to work fine. But your user now needs to know, okay, I have to pass it in with the double quotes if it has anything other than my normal name. So
the bottom line is with this current approach of using just SQL object name, we can't really get it to work with with a table name like this.
Oh, I think you can. I think if you pass that table name in, that's going to work with that. Because when you pass it in, you're going to have to, like if you did it as a bind variable, you'd pass in that as a bind variable, it would work just fine. It's going to, because you're going to put in my, double quote, my 2 single quotes, employees, double quote. I think you just want 2 single quotes and it should work. Yeah, that should work, I think.
You mean it should have rejected it, or it should have let it go?
I think it should go. Did it not let it go?
No.
Oh, all right. Well, no, because you didn't put the double quotes around it. If you go put the double quotes around it, sorry.
Actually, this is confusing, isn't it, folks?
Yes,
Then we're going to show you how you can avoid doing
Now
that.
put the double quote around that. That will work.
Okay.
Yes. Okay. Exactly. So here we go. So the thing is exactly this, that it's you have to make sure you get these table names and quoted around them. And so if you're going to do what you've done here and you're going to test it against a SQL object name, and you're going to require them to put in the double quotes, that's going to work, right? You're going to be able to test that. But if you don't want them to have to pass in the double quotes, for example, then you have to have a way to end quote around it, right? And that's where you come up with using end quote name. So when somebody passes something in and you want to use it, I generally recommend that you end quote the name. You use end quote name right here. So if you do what you've got here in line 11 highlighted, then they don't need to pass in the double quotes around their table name.
Right. So now we'll pass in this string, no double quotes.
Right. Exactly.
And now it works.
Yes.
So it looks like set val. Let's see. I wonder if my code didn't like having right. I don't think I wrote this flexibly enough to not include a where clause.
Oh, okay.
Anyway, so we're getting specific feedback from the SQL statement.
Right.
So there's more work that I have to do, but.
Well, there's a fair amount of work here, but the next thing that we run into, right, is at the end when you've got this where clause. Now you're passing in a where clause, right? So I don't know how we're gonna rationalize this where clause, right? And at some point, you're just opening yourself up, and there may not be a solution to it. I think that what you're doing here with using schema name and SQL object name are actually really good for your end user, because you get good messages back. Mm-hmm. What I might suggest, and it works well what you're doing here, but you could actually have some local variables that you put the results into and test them that way. And then you can capture additional things. But this works great. And the key here is you got, for the table name, you've got that end quote name. And end quote name has 2 flavors, true or false as the second parameter. If the second parameter is true, it's going to uppercase it for you. And so if you're expecting the user's input the user to put in a lowercase DEPT, right, you might leave that true. But then if you leave it true, you'll never be able to use mixed case, right? You can't do it.
Which we don't want to do anyway, really. But we have to allow for
it. It really depends on what level you're going to support. I actually recently was looking at Connor McDonald's audit generator. We've perhaps talked about this a couple times. Yeah. Connor he just says, I'm not supporting any of that stuff. Your tables need to be uppercase, and they need to be standard names.
Well, I think one point about that too is, again, this idea of building this generic SQL API and PL SQL is just terrible. Don't do it. And so it's pretty rare that you're going to have things like, let's pass in the where clause, right? And chances are, if you have a situation like, let's pass in the where clause, and in general, the situation with SQL injection, you need to trace back where the text came from, right? If the text is coming from user input, then you've got heightened danger. Clocks on alarm should be going off. SQL injection is an ever-present possibility. But if the where clause is being constructed programmatically, you still want to take some time with it and do everything you can to secure it. But it's not as much of a totally crazy thing to do.
Right. And so then that actually brings up one other piece of the Dbms Assert package that is kind of interesting. At some point, you've done exactly what you said. You have traced through and you've validated that I'm okay with this value. I know this value is okay, but I want to make sure that everybody else knows that I've done that work. And the way that you tell people you've done the work, you've committed to the work, is that you use this no-op function, right?
And I got to say, folks, I am now hearing really for the first time, what is the point of this crazy function? It doesn't do anything.
It doesn't do anything. It doesn't do anything except tell the world that you have taken responsibility for this and you believe that you're convinced that you don't need to do anything else to this. So if you've taken responsibility for this where clause, you've constructed it, you know that it's okay, put sys.dbms assert no op around it. Right. Now, I'll tell you, when I see this no op,
yeah,
I am looking for a comment after it as to who put it there, right? I want to know. You might need it after the semicolon or the semicolon somewhere else, but yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, and we've
just like if you ever say when others then null, there may be times when you want to do that, but you need a comment that says, here's why we really don't care.
Right. Yes, exactly. But that's what this dbms assert.noop is all about. And I'll tell you that there's a reason to do both. There's a reason to do Stephen says this is okay, because that's for me to read. But the reason to do sys dbms assert.noop in addition to that is as code control programs sweep over this. If you have anything that checks your code for SQL injection, it's going to look for this to have somebody say that you've done it. The where clause would be in Apex with a cascading LOV. I have a specific function to return the SQL for each LOV. What do you recommend? So this is interesting. Yes, this is a huge challenge. So Rachel has this. So you've got a function that returns your where clause. What you need to do in that function is confirm that everything that you're passing along to the function is valid. So if your where clause is going to be column name equals value, column name equals value, you need to check to make sure all of those column names are legitimate. And what you might consider doing with all of the pieces that are supposed to be column names is putting sys.dbmsassert.endQuote.name around it, because then it will quote the column name. And if the column name has a semicolon in it or something like that, it will just fail. So the end quote, yeah, that's it exactly right there. End quote name. I'll say I don't love the end quote literal function. I talked about you'll need to make sure that your literals are okay as well. End quote literal will simply error if your literal has a single quote, any number of single quotes in it.
We were talking about this before the call started because I've never really used this myself. And
right.
The usage note is a little bit weird sounding to me. It says verify that all single quotes except it's saying to you that if you have something like this, it's not going to work. It's got a single quote in it. It's going to fail out. And it almost looked to me like it was saying, we'll verify that all single quotes are paired with it, but no, it's on you to do that.
It's on you to do that, and it will fail even if you've done it. Even if you have paired them all up, it's going to fail. So end quote literal I find to be a little bit not very helpful. If you have a quote at the beginning or the end, it's not going to fail. But yeah, and it will just return it to you quoted.
The no-op thing you mentioned to me was really good. So just to be clear from what he said is as we have more and more automated code analysis in place, Apex Advisor sweeps through your code, there are commercial products that will do this, you're going to start to find tools that will actually identify elements in your dynamic SQL execute immediate calls in which you're not calling dbms assert and flag them. And this would be a way of saying to those automatic checkers, we've thought about this. This is exactly what we want to do. Yeah.
Nice. Yes. Thank you. Yeah. So that is the key. I think is a few things. First is anytime you're referencing a database object, you should do two things. First, you should encode it, right? And that's not true for schemas. If you're talking about a database schema, you want to make sure that you're using Dbms assert schema name, right? To make sure that it's a real schema. The second is you want to encode your object names. And when possible, when you can actually get a good value of it, you might as well also check to see that the object exists using the Dbms assert SQL object, right? That Stephen showed here.
Mm-hmm.
Because then you get you get your error message sooner, right?
Right.
If you construct it with just end quote name, it'll pass that, and then you go to run your execute immediate, and your execute immediate is what fails. Ideally, you want that failure to happen as high in the stack as you can. Ideally, your execute immediate isn't what fails; it happens before that.
Right.
But the worst case scenario is it gets the execute immediate, it hits your encoded name, and it fails because that object doesn't exist. Yeah. And that's the key. So listen, I would say the third thing, of course, is find variables for everything that's not an object name, right? There's really no reason to use an equals and an encoded literal or a direct number. That should be a bind variable.
Right, for sure. Yeah. All right. And I've heard that you have another meeting to go to. So before you have to go off to that, I think that's what Michelle was telling me. So let's switch off of that. Thank you for all your wise words and experience with DBMS. Assert, share with us your favorite book or cultural artifact.
Oh yeah. So I read a book that was just fascinating to me. It's called The Information. I think the author's name is Glick, and it's just a little bit sprung on me. But The Information is a great, it's really a history of the human strive to get more and more information and find out more and more about how information flows, how information, this is it exactly. I really enjoyed this book. It's a history of what we do in our business, but it's also how our business affects so much else in the world. So I thought this was a great.
I like the mention of human consciousness, because what I was going to say, if you didn't have one, was, let's stop the share. So this is a book I just got. I haven't even started reading it, called The Unconscious. It's apparently a collection of modern scientific understanding of the unconscious. That some of you have heard me go on a riff about. So this is basically a book by consciousness, about what consciousness knows about the unconscious. That's what it comes down to. Excellent. And really, consciousness, when we talk, it's the conscious part of us talking to each other. We have virtually no visibility into the unconscious. But apparently there have been a number of experiments that have been done to start to get an understanding, sort of like indirect, about what's going on. So I'm looking forward to reading that. I'll hopefully share some of that in future tips.
Yeah, I'll grab it. Let me just say, I think that this conversation was fantastic. I learned something just talking to you in this last half hour. So it's an important element for me to make sure that people understand that I use execute immediate so much more than I used to, just having talked with you. But it's for that reason that these things have bubbled up to the top of my consciousness.
And I love working with Anton. We do a lot of work together at Insum because I like to work fast, do fun stuff, and I'm not really that diligent and disciplined. And Anton's like, Stephen, what about this? What about that? So thank you so much.
It's been fun.
All right, folks, thanks for joining us. Stay healthy, stay safe. I'm still going out masked. We still got 35,000 people a day testing positive for COVID, and over 1,200 people dying a day here in the United States. So I don't know about you, but I'm not ready to go back to normal. But be safe, stay healthy. Let's do all we can to achieve world peace now rather than 500 years from now. All right. Happy coding. Bye, everybody.